This trip made me realize I don't want you anymore. No hesitation, no emotion, no attempt to soften the blow. Just a statement, delivered like he was talking about the weather. I was 42 years old. We had been together for 11 years. We had built a life most people assumed was permanent. We never married. That was his choice, not mine. He always said he preferred things fluid, liked the idea of independence, of not being legally bound. I went along with it because I loved him, and because I believed commitment was proven in daily life, not paperwork. So when he came back from his 10-day yoga retreat and said he didn't want me anymore, I didn't argue. All right, I said. That was it. He looked at me like he expected something else. Tears, anger, a breakdown he could point to later and say, "See, this is why I had to leave." I didn't give him that. I didn't disappear. I didn't beg. I stayed exactly where I was. 2 nights later, reality caught up with him. Because the very next thing he needed, something essential for his new, independent life, was something only I could approve. And that's when I realized something painful and undeniable. He didn't want me anymore, but he still expected access to the life I had built. I owned the house. My name was on the deed. My credit was on the mortgage. We had discussed this arrangement many times over the years, especially when friends got married or bought property together. He always said he preferred it this way, said it meant fewer complications if things ever ended. He never imagined he'd be the one leaving. He never imagined independence would come without a safety net. And he certainly never imagined I would let him experience the full weight of his decision. I'm 42 now, but when we first met, I was 31 and just beginning to feel settled in my own skin. I ran a small consulting firm back then, still do now, and my life was structured, demanding, but stable. I liked knowing where things stood. I liked building something slowly and watching it grow. I had already bought my house 8 years ago, long before he moved in, my name on the deed, my down payment, my credit tied to the mortgage. It wasn't a power move. It was simply the stage of life I was in when we met. He came into my life at a time when I wasn't looking to be rescued, and I wasn't looking to rescue anyone else. That's probably why I trusted him. We met through mutual friends, casually, without fireworks or drama. He was thoughtful, articulate, deeply invested in wellness and personal growth. He managed a wellness center and spoke often about balance, independence, not tying your identity to institutions or expectations. Marriage, he said early on, felt unnecessary to him, a piece of paper, a social construct. I wanted marriage. I won't pretend I didn't, but I wanted him more. So when he said he preferred to keep things fluid to avoid legal entanglements, I told myself it didn't matter. That commitment showed up in shared mornings, shared stress, shared dinners at the end of long days. That love didn't need contracts to be real. For 11 years, we lived like that. He moved into my house gradually, organically. At first just weekends, then more often. Then one day his clothes filled half the closet and his toothbrush stayed permanently by the sink. We split utilities and groceries. He contributed what he could. I paid the mortgage, the insurance, the taxes, the major repairs, the roof, the plumbing, the furnace that died one winter without warning. We talked about it, repeatedly. Whenever friends got married or bought property together, the conversation came up, and every time he said the same thing. I actually like our setup, he'd say. It keeps things clean. If something ever went wrong, we wouldn't destroy each other. I believed him. I believed that meant maturity. That meant foresight. That meant we were choosing each other freely, not out of obligation. Looking back, I see the early signs more clearly now. The way he liked the security of my stability, but resisted the responsibility that came with it. The way independence was always something he talked about, while I quietly carried the weight of permanence. The way my house was our home when it was comfortable, but technically yours when discussions got serious. Still, we built a life. Shared routines, shared friends, shared history that stretched over a decade. We weathered stressful years, career shifts, burnout, exhaustion. We became people who knew each other's silences, or so I thought. By the time he started talking about needing space, about reconnecting with himself, I didn't feel threatened. Work had been heavy for both of us. We really had been ships passing in the night. A yoga retreat didn't sound like an ending. It sounded like a pause. I didn't know he was already packing his exit in his head. And I didn't know that the independence he'd always talked about was about to become very real, for both of us. The truth is, the ending didn't come out of nowhere. It just arrived faster than I expected. For months before the retreat, our lives had started drifting out of sync. Not dramatically. not in ways that screamed danger, just small misalignments that were easy to excuse when you've been with someone for over a decade. We were tired, both of us. My consulting firm had grown, which meant longer hours and more responsibility. I carried the kind of stress that doesn't turn off when you shut your laptop. He was managing a wellness center that constantly demanded emotional labor, staff issues, client crises, the pressure to always appear calm and enlightened. We passed each other in the house like polite roommates some nights. I noticed changes, but I interpreted them generously. He started spending more time on his phone, especially late at night. He said he was reading, journaling, connecting with people from his yoga community. I didn't pry. Independence, remember? That was always his language. He talked more about alignment, about outgrowing old versions of yourself, about how staying in one place too long can stunt your spirit. None of those things sounded like accusations. They sounded like growth. Sometimes he'd say things that made me uneasy, but I swallowed the feeling before it could become a question. "You're very grounded," he said once. "Not affectionate, observational." Another time, after a long day, he added, "You're comfortable where you are. I don't know if I still am." I asked what that meant. He shrugged. "Nothing bad, just thinking." I let it go. Friends asked how we were doing. I said fine, because fine felt easier than honest. His parents didn't pressure us about marriage anymore. They'd learned that was a closed topic. Still, I could feel the subtle shift in how they spoke to me, like they sensed something I hadn't fully named yet. The biggest warning sign was how often he framed his dissatisfaction as internal. I need space. I need clarity. I need to reconnect with myself. Notice the pattern. There was never we in those sentences. I suggested counseling once, gently, not as a crisis response, just maintenance. He smiled and said, "I don't think we're there. This is more about me." I believed him. When he mentioned the yoga retreat, 10 days in another state with a group from his studio, I encouraged it, packed him snacks, drove him to the airport, told him to take the time he needed. I thought space would bring him back clearer. What I didn't realize was that the distance was doing exactly what he wanted it to do. It was giving him permission to imagine a life without me, without responsibility, without the structure that had quietly supported him for years. Permission to rehearse a version of the breakup where he was brave and evolved, and I was simply part of the past. By the time he came back, he wasn't confused. He was resolved. And I was still standing in the same place, believing we were just going through a phase. I didn't know the ground beneath me had already shifted. He came back on a Tuesday evening. I picked him up from the airport like I always did. He slid into the passenger seat, placed his bag at his feet, fastened his seatbelt. Everything about him looked the same, but something felt absent. He stared out the window the entire drive home, watching familiar streets pass like they belonged to someone else's life. "How was the retreat?" I asked. "It was transformative," he said. I waited. That word usually came with a story, insight, emotion. Nothing followed. "What does that mean?" I asked gently. He shrugged. "Hard to explain. We got home around 8. I'd cooked dinner, pasta, salad, nothing fancy. Habit, care, muscle memory." He barely touched it, checked his phone, put it face down, picked it up again. I felt the air thicken between us. "Is something wrong?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. He took a breath, then looked at me with an expression I didn't recognize. Calm, decided, almost relieved. "I need to talk to you about something." I put my fork down. "Okay." He didn't ease into it, didn't circle the truth, didn't ask how I felt. "This trip made me realize I don't want you anymore." Just like that. No apology, no explanation, no visible struggle. He said it the way someone announces a conclusion they reached days ago. I sat there, my hands resting on the table, my heart beating steadily enough that it surprised me. I waited for anger to rise, for panic, for the instinct to fight for what we had built. Instead, I felt still. "All right," I said. He blinked. "That's it?" "What do you want me to say?" I asked. "You've made a decision. I'm not going to beg." He looked almost disappointed, like he'd expected tears, or shouting, or a scene that would validate the story he'd been telling himself on that retreat. "I thought you'd be more upset," he said. "I am upset," I replied. "I'm just not going to perform it for you." That landed. He shifted in his chair. "I'll start looking for a place. I just need a few weeks to figure things out." "Take your time," I said. "I'm not kicking you out tomorrow." He studied me. "You're being very calm about this." "What's the alternative?" I asked. "Screaming? Throwing things?" We're adults. This is ending. Let's handle it like adults. He nodded, stood up, and went upstairs. A few minutes later, I heard his voice through the ceiling, low, animated, on the phone with someone. I didn't try to listen. I cleaned the kitchen, loaded the dishwasher, went to my office, stared at my screen without absorbing anything. Around midnight, I went upstairs. The guest room door was closed. I walked into what had been our bedroom and lay there, staring at the ceiling until sleep finally took me some time after 3. I didn't know it yet, but that sentence, "I don't want you anymore," was about to collide with reality in a way he hadn't prepared for. Because wanting out is easy. Leaving without consequences is not. The next morning, the house felt unfamiliar. Not empty, just altered. Like furniture had been moved an inch to the left, and my body noticed, even if my mind hadn't caught up yet. When I came downstairs, he was already at the kitchen table, laptop open, scrolling through apartment listings like this was a project he'd already scheduled into his calendar. "Morning," I said. "Morning," he replied, without looking up. I made coffee, poured 2 cups out of habit, set one in front of him. He accepted it automatically, the way people do when they're used to being taken care of. "I found a few places," he said. "I'm going to schedule some viewings this week." "Okay." "Most of them want first month, last month, and a security deposit," he continued. "It's going to be tight financially until my next paycheck." I didn't respond, just took a sip of coffee and waited. After a few seconds, he glanced up. "I might need to borrow some money, just for the deposits. I'll pay you back." "How much?" I asked. "Maybe 5,000. I laughed. Not cruelly, not loudly, just a short, involuntary sound that surprised both of us. "You just broke up with me," I said, "and you're asking for $5,000 in the same conversation." "It's a loan," he said quickly. "I just said I'd pay you back." "No," I replied calmly. "Figure it out yourself." His expression hardened. "That's petty." "That's reality," I said. "You don't want me anymore. Part of not wanting me is not having access to my money." He shut the laptop with a sharp snap. "I've contributed to this household for years." "You paid utilities and groceries," I said. "I paid the mortgage, property taxes, insurance, and every major repair. Don't pretend we've been equal partners financially." "I make less than you," he said. "I did what I could." "I'm not saying you didn't," I replied. "I'm saying you don't get to leave me and expect me to fund your exit." He stood up, grabbed his coffee, and went back upstairs. The guest room door slammed. I sat there for a moment, letting the silence settle. That was when it hit me. This wasn't shock. This wasn't heartbreak. This was clarity. He hadn't thought past the sentence, "I don't want you anymore." He'd imagined freedom without friction, independence without cost. He'd built a version of the future where I quietly supported his transition out of our life together. And in that moment, I understood something I hadn't allowed myself to see before. For years, I had been his foundation, and he had mistaken that for something he could step off without consequence. That afternoon, after a client call I barely remember, I called my lawyer, the same one who had handled my house purchase and my business contracts years ago. I explained the situation simply. "You're smart that the house is in your name only," he said. "Without shared financial investment, she doesn't have much ground to stand on." "What should I do?" I asked. "Document everything. And don't give her money without a written agreement. Better yet, don't give her anything at all." I hung up and started pulling records. Mortgage statements, repair receipts, insurance documents. Not out of spite. Out of self-respect. For the first time since he said he didn't want me, I wasn't reacting. I was preparing. And that scared him more than anger ever could. 2 days after the breakup, the tension in the house thickened. He had scheduled 3 apartment viewings. I knew because he announced them out loud, like progress reports. I didn't comment. I stayed in my office, worked through client emails, held meetings, did everything I could to keep my life moving forward instead of circling what had already ended. Late that afternoon, he knocked on my office door. "Can we talk?" he asked. "Sure." He came in, closed the door behind him, and sat across from my desk. His posture was different now. Less certain, less serene. The retreat calm had worn off. "I've been thinking about the logistics," he said. "Most of the apartments I'm looking at want proof of income, references, credit checks, normal stuff." "Okay." "The thing is, my credit isn't great. I had some issues a few years ago with a credit card. It's mostly resolved, but my score is still recovering." I didn't interrupt. I could already see the shape of the conversation. "And a lot of landlords want a cosigner if your credit is below a certain threshold," he continued carefully. "No," I said. He blinked. "I haven't even asked yet." You're about to ask me to co-sign a lease, I said. The answer is no. I need help, he said, frustration creeping into his voice. I can't get approved without a co-signer. Then find someone else, I replied. Family, a friend. My parents are retired. They don't qualify. My friends either don't make enough or won't do it. Then find a different apartment, a roommate situation, something that doesn't require a co-signer. Those places are either unsafe or too far from my work. Not my problem. He stared at me like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. You're really going to make this difficult, he said. I'm not making anything difficult, I replied. You decided to leave. You don't get to leave and expect me to remain responsible for your housing. I thought we could be adults about this. We are being adults, I said. Adults understand that decisions have consequences. He left my office, visibly upset. For the next hour, I heard him pacing upstairs, making phone calls. His parents, friends, his sister. Each conversation ended the same way. Frustration bleeding into desperation. That evening, he came back. I talked to my parents, he said. They can help with some deposit money, but they won't co-sign. Their accountant advised against it. Okay, that's it? He asked. What do you want me to say? I asked. I already told you I'm not co-signing. I need to move out, he said. I didn't say you could stay indefinitely, I replied. I said take your time. How much time is reasonable? He asked. End of the month, I said. 3 weeks. 3 weeks? His voice rose. That's not enough time. It's plenty of time, I said, if you're looking at realistic options. And if I can't find a place by then? Then you find a backup plan, I said. Hotel, friend's couch, storage unit, whatever it takes. You're being cruel. I'm being practical. He looked at me like I was someone he didn't recognize anymore. And in a way, I wasn't. I was no longer the person who softened consequences for him. I was the person who respected them. A week passed like that. He looked at more apartments, 15, maybe more. Every evening came with a new complaint. One place needed a co-signer. Another had income requirements he didn't meet. The ones he could afford, in his words, were unacceptable, unsafe, too far, too small, too depressing. I listened without responding. He started spending more time out of the house, coming back late, moving through rooms quietly, like a guest who wasn't sure how long they were allowed to stay. I didn't ask where he went. I didn't need to. We weren't together anymore. I reminded myself of that when the silence felt sharp. One night, around 11, he came into my office while I was finishing some work. He looked exhausted. Not dramatic exhaustion. The kind that comes from realizing your options are shrinking. I need to ask you something, he said, and I need you to actually consider it. Go ahead. What if I stayed for a few more months? He asked. Paid you rent. We'd be roommates, basically. It would give me time to fix my credit, save more money, find something decent. No, he frowned. Why not? Because you don't want me, I said. Those were your words. It would be temporary. It would be torture, I replied, for both of us. You won't even consider it? I've considered it, I said. The answer is no. That's when he cried. Real tears. No manipulation, no raised voice, just frustration spilling over after weeks of resistance. He sat down heavily in the chair and buried his face in his hands. I don't know what to do, he said. Every option is terrible. The places I can get without a co-signer are unsafe or falling apart. You should have thought about this before you ended things, I said quietly. I made a mistake, he said. I looked up. What? I made a mistake, he repeated. The retreat. The whole thing. I got caught up in this idea of freedom, independence, finding myself, and now I'm realizing I can't even afford to leave. The words landed harder than he probably intended. So you don't actually want me, I said. You just need me. That's not fair, he said. It's accurate, I replied. Can we try to fix this, he asked. Counseling. Something. No. Why not? Because you didn't want counseling when you came back from the retreat, I said. You wanted out. You said it without hesitation, without emotion. He shook his head. People make mistakes. You meant it, I said. You're just realizing the consequences now. He left the office, voice raised as he argued with someone on the phone upstairs. I caught words like controlling and impossible and trapped, drifting down the hallway. That night I didn't sleep much. Not because I missed him, but because I finally understood the full weight of what I was doing. I wasn't being cruel. I was letting him face reality without cushioning the fall. And that realization hurt more than I expected. Because it meant accepting that love alone doesn't protect you from being used, and that self-respect sometimes looks like walking someone all the way to the edge of their own decision and letting them see what's below. The night before the deadline felt heavier than all the days before it combined. 2 days left. That was the boundary I'd given him. Clear, calm, reasonable. End of the month. 3 weeks to figure out what came next. I hadn't raised my voice once. I hadn't threatened. I hadn't changed the terms. And yet somehow I was now the villain in the story he was telling everyone else. That evening, I was in my bedroom reading when I heard a knock. Not a polite one, not hesitant. He opened the door without waiting for an answer. "We need to talk about this," he said. "We've talked about it," I replied. "Tomorrow's the deadline." "I have nowhere to go," he said, standing in the middle of the room like he still belonged there. "That's unfortunate." He stared at me, disbelief flashing across his face. "You're really going to make me homeless?" "I'm not making you anything," I said evenly. "I'm enforcing a boundary." "They're not boundaries," he snapped. "They're punishments." "No," I said. "They're consequences." He started pacing. "My parents' place is 4 hours away. I'd have to quit my job, start over completely." "You wanted independence," I said. "This is what it looks like." "I told you I was wrong," he said. "I told you I made a mistake." "You were wrong about how easy leaving would be," I said. "Not about wanting to leave." "That's not true." "It is," I said. "You don't want me back. You want the life you had back." He stopped pacing, looked at me like I'd slapped him. "That's a horrible thing to say." "It's an honest one," I replied. "Something you should try." He sat on the edge of the bed, voice dropping. "What if I signed something? A lease agreement. Market rent. We'd be landlord and tenant. Legal. Culain." "No." "Why?" he asked, almost pleading now. "You'd be making money." "Because I don't want you here," I said. "I don't want to live with someone who looked me in the eye and said they didn't want me anymore." He stood up abruptly. "Fine. I'll take the apartment in that neighborhood you said wasn't safe. The one with the broken locks and mold." "Don't try to guilt me," I said. "You have other options. You're choosing not to take them. Moving back with my parents is a complete life reset." "Then maybe," I said quietly, "you should have thought about that before you came back from your retreat and decided to blow up our life together." He slammed the door and went back to the guest room. I heard drawers opening, clothes being shoved into bags, the frantic noise of someone realizing they had miscalculated badly. I sat there for a long time after that, heart racing, not with fear, but with certainty. This was the moment. Not the breakup, not the retreat, not the money requests. This. The moment I stopped negotiating my worth to make his exit more comfortable. I wasn't choosing punishment. I was choosing myself. And once I did that, there was no going back. He moved out the next morning. Not because he'd found an apartment. Not because some miracle approval had come through overnight. He took his parents up on their offer. The one he'd been insisting wasn't an option. 4 hours away, a full reset. Exactly the outcome he'd been trying to avoid. I helped him carry boxes to the car, not because I owed him anything, because I wanted the ending to be clean. We didn't talk much. There was nothing left to negotiate. He moved carefully, like someone walking through a place that no longer belonged to him. When the last box was loaded, he stood by the driver's door, keys in hand, staring at the house like he was trying to memorize it. "This isn't how I wanted this to go," he said quietly. "How did you want it to go?" I asked. He hesitated. "I don't know, just not like this." "You wanted to leave without consequences," I said. "That's not how life works." He nodded slowly, like he was finally understanding something he'd refused to see before. "I see that now," he said. "Do you?" I asked. He didn't answer. He got into the car and drove away. I watched until he turned the corner, then went back inside and closed the door behind me. The house felt different immediately. Not empty, honest. I walked through the rooms, noticing the absence of his things. The empty shelf in the bathroom, the gap in the closet, the photos missing from the hallway. 11 years reduced to negative space. A few weeks later, I got an email from him. He'd settled in at his parents' place, found a remote job doing wellness coaching, said he finally understood why I hadn't helped him financially, why I hadn't co-signed, why I'd drawn such firm boundaries, said he needed to face the full weight of his decision without a safety net. He hoped someday we could talk without anger. I didn't respond. A month after that, his sister reached out, said he was struggling, depressed, regretful, asked if I'd be willing to talk to him, just to help him get closure. I said no. She called me heartless. I blocked her number. People had opinions. Mutual friends said I was cold, that after 11 years, I could have been kinder, more flexible, more forgiving. None of them lived in my house. None of them carried my mortgage. None of them were asked to fund an exit they didn't choose. 2 months later, I started seeing someone new, someone I met through a friend, someone with her own house, her own career, her own stability, someone who didn't need me to function, but chose to be with me anyway. When my ex found out, he sent a long message about how quickly I'd moved on, how disposable he felt, how he'd wasted 11 years with someone who could replace him so easily. I didn't reply. I blocked him, because the truth was simple. I hadn't replaced him. I'd just stopped carrying someone who refused to carry themselves. And the consequences he was living with now weren't my revenge. They were the natural result of the choice he made when he looked at me and said he didn't want me anymore. The quiet settled in slowly. Not the sharp, echoing quiet of loss, but the steady kind. The kind that lets you hear your own thoughts again. The kind that doesn't ask you to explain yourself to anyone. I stayed in the house. My house. The one I bought 8 years ago. The one I maintained. The one that had carried both of us for a long time. I repainted a few rooms, rearranged the furniture, took down photos that no longer felt like memories but obligations. With each small change, the space became mine again, not out of spite, but out of truth. People still had opinions. Some said I was cold. Some said I should have helped him more after 11 years. Some said love means sacrifice. They never asked who had been sacrificing all along. Love does not mean absorbing the consequences of someone else's choices. Love does not mean becoming a safety net for a person who has already decided to leave you. Love does not mean erasing yourself so someone else can feel free. For a long time, I thought strength meant flexibility, compromise, endurance. Now I understand something deeper. Strength is clarity. When he came back from that retreat and said he didn't want me anymore, he meant it. In that moment, he chose independence. What he didn't choose, or even consider, was responsibility. He assumed the structure of our life would remain intact while he stepped away from it. He assumed I would soften the landing. I didn't, not because I hated him, but because I finally respected myself. He wanted freedom without cost. I gave him exactly what he asked for. Complete independence, complete separation, no safety net. People called it cruel. I called it honest. Today, my life is smaller in some ways and infinitely lighter in others. I'm with someone new now, not because I was searching, but because I was open. She doesn't need me to function. She has her own foundation, her own direction, her own sense of self. She chooses me, and I choose her, not out of convenience, not out of dependence, but out of alignment. And that makes all the difference. If there's one thing I hope anyone listening takes from this story, it's this. When someone says they don't want you anymore, believe them. And when they discover what that actually costs, don't let them make it your responsibility. I'm 42 years old. I own my home. I have my career. I have my dignity. And I will never again mistake love for self-abandonment. She wanted independence. I let her have it. Turns out it's a lot lonelier than she imagined.